Chapter 68. Mazen. Aliyah the Forgotten, that was what the citizens of Medine called the Sultan's first wife behind closed doors. To Mazen she had always been a specter, a story his father never told. She was from a time before the wife killings, a memory inaccessible to all of them, even Omar. At least that had been his belief. But now all the disparate pieces clicked together. Aliyah, an Ifrit, the Sultan, a jinn killer. Finally, Mazen understood why Omar's blood was black, why he hated the Sultan. But why? Why would you kill jinn if your mother is one? Omar sighed. As always, you ask the wrong questions, Mazen. He slid a knife from his sleeve and angled it toward them. Mazen tensed, poised to flee, and then he heard Omar's voice coming from behind. When he turned, his brother was close enough to stab him. The merchant shot forward with her knife, but the strike only broke Omar's body into smoke. The first Omar, real or an illusion, rushed at them with his blade. There was a shriek of metal as Aisha held up her sword just in time to catch the attack. I'll be relieving you of the king's relic now, Aisha. Omar slid the dagger off her sword, aimed it at her heart. Aisha retaliated with a slash, but Omar disappeared before it landed. He reappeared behind her. Aisha turned, and Omar buried the knife in her chest. No, Mazen pushed his brother away. He had let Aisha die once. How could he? Aisha grinned, baring crimson-coated teeth. Both of her eyes were black as midnight. You'll have to try harder than that, jinn killer. She snapped her fingers, and the corpse that had been Tawil reached out and gripped Omar's ankle. For the first time in his life, Mazen saw fear on Omar's face. Then the corpse pulled, and Omar fell, the lamp tumbling from his hands and to the ground. A heartbeat later, it was in Luli's hands. She turned and ran toward Kadir. Mazen chased after her. Kadir and Rija fought in a raging storm, the winds around them as much a barrier as a cage. Luli stood helplessly at the edge, starry robes billowing in the gust. Before she could protest, Mazen stole her knife and sliced his palm. Understanding lit her eyes. She handed him the lamp. The moment he pressed his bloody palm to the surface, he felt it. Power thrumming beneath his skin. Hundreds of years ago, his ancestor had tricked an Ifrit into enchanting this object for him. His father had warned Luli that the relic worked only for ones who shared his blood. That was why Omar had been able to use the lamp, and why the Sultan had never feared Luli using it against him. Rija, Mazen yelled into the storm, you are bound to me, and you will serve me. He held up the lamp. Stop. The winds ceased. The moment the storm cleared, Luli rushed toward Kadir and threw her arms around his neck. For a few moments, Rija simply stood watching them. Then they stepped forward, and mid-stride transformed from a shadow into a woman with sharp, angular features and a crown of braids atop her head. When Mazen approached, they stomped toward him. Human! Their turquoise eyes sparkled. I'm going to rip out your throat. Mazen found himself stupidly holding the lamp up like a shield. You think I, the mightiest of jinn, will abide your abuse? You think I... Rija! The Ifrit stopped at the sound of Kadir's voice. He is a friend, not an enemy. Rija glared at Mazen with a vehemence so intense Mazen half feared they would set him on fire. Instead, they turned and said, Who then? Introduce me so that I may kill them. There, Kadir said. He raised an arm and pointed at Omar, who was fighting Aisha and her reanimated corpse. Then he pointed to a human-shaped smudge approaching from the east. And there. Mazen followed his gaze to the west to another shadow. There were figures approaching from all directions. Mazen failed to comprehend where they were coming from. The strange room was so massive he could perceive no walls nor doorways. Reinforcements? Luli's face was pale. From here, all Mazen could make out was their black attire and the glint of hidden weapons. If what Omar had said was true, then it was possible they were jinn, or thieves, or both. They can't just be my brother's thieves, Mazen murmured. There's too many of them. Luli grimaced. But how? Has your brother been hiding this force all along? How did they get here? When she looked at him expectantly, Mazen just shook his head helplessly. The Sultan had said there were multiple paths beneath the sand sea, but Mazen did not know which Omar had used. His brother's business had always been a secret. Mazen had no idea where to even begin unraveling his plans. The Jinn of the lamp strode past him, cracking their knuckles. It does not matter if there is 1 or 1,000, I will burn them all to the ground. They cast a look over their shoulder. Mazen shrank back at the violence in their eyes. You may be able to command me, idiot human, but if you get in my way, I will murder you. Mazen blinked. He stared down at the lamp. An ifrit, his to command? It was a dizzying thought, one that had not quite sunk in. The merchant reached out and stole her dagger back, startling him from his reverie. She looked at her bodyguard. Kadir, fire? The blade obediently burst into flame, but Kadir looked wary. What are you doing? Luli scoffed. Killing a sultan killer. The words brought Mazen back to the present. He breathed in as Luli rushed past him, Kadir limping after her. Rija rushed to offer a hand, turning their back on Mazen and making it clear they would not wait for orders. How can I help? He heard Rija say. I do not deserve your help, came Kadir's weak response. Luli sighed. But we could use it, if you're the mightiest of jinn. Prove it. She and the Ifrit kept throwing heated words at each other until Kadir made them concede to watch each other's backs, and then they headed into battle, leaving him behind. Mazen wanted to follow after them, but his body refused his commands. He felt eyes on him and looked up to see Omar. Omar, who had escaped his battle with Aisha by leaving her to deal with his reinforcements. Omar, who stared at him blankly from the distance, fingers brushing his ear. Again, Mazen saw that strange muted glow coming from Omar's earring. And then the world seemed to shudder and break. The pale sand faded, the thieves disappeared, and everything fell into darkness so complete Mazen had the distinct feeling he'd been plucked from the world like a thread torn from a tapestry. When his mind finally caught up to the reality, he was no longer standing in darkness. Mazen was in his mother's chambers. At first he was confused. Why am I here? But then he remembered. He was delivering a message from his father. Uma? His mother lay on her bed unmoving. He called her again, softly. When she did not answer, he drew close enough to peer at her face. Her eyes were open. He drew back, heart beating in his throat. That was when the dread began to set in, when he realized her eyes were unseeing. He saw the blood staining her skin and the knife protruding from her chest, where a crimson stain was spreading. He stumbled away from the bed, the body. He realized he was screaming. He heard footsteps, cries from the soldiers outside, but their voices were distant, unimportant. Mazen fell against the doorway, heaving, eyesight blurring, and he entered his mother's chambers. Again? He blinked. His mother lay on her bed unmoving. He hesitated. Uma? He took one step into the room before freezing, caught off guard when someone stepped past him. Omar. Omar, he hissed. You cannot see she is sleeping? But Omar was not listening. He paused in front of the bed, a vacant expression on his face. And then a flicker of motion, a glimmer of silver up his sleeve. Mazen's mother shifted, eyes twitching beneath the weight of sleep. Mazen reached out toward her. No. Omar's knife came down. No. Her eyes shot open with a pained gasp. A shudder racked her body as she looked at Omar. Her lips moved, forming soundless words. Omar leaned close enough for his lips to brush her ear and said, The Sultan stole my mother from me. Now I shall steal you from him. He stepped away and tore at the blankets, replicating a struggle. He sparked a match and singed the curtains, creating evidence of a non-existent jinn fire. Then he escaped out the window without looking back. The Sultan had claimed Mazen's mother was killed by a jinn. He had died without knowing the truth. The vision shifted so that Mazen was in front of his father's bed. His father, pale and sickly, looked at him with wide, glassy eyes. Mazen had seen his father angry before, heartbroken even, but never fearful. You warned me never to trust anyone, Yuba, he said. The words were Omar's, but the voice, he was horrified to realize, he was in his own body, and that there was a black knife in his hands. You ought to have heeded your own advice. He cut a ribbon of blood into the Sultan's neck with his knife. No, Yuba, this isn't me. This isn't me. He wanted to reach out and shake him. Yuba, please, please wake up. The vision shuddered. Get up, Prince. Mazen felt a hand on his cheek and then a slap. The world slanted. One moment he was in his father's chamber, the next he was collapsed on his knees in the sand, breathing hard and clutching the lamp. Someone tilted his face up. Even though the world was hazy, he could make out every scar on Aisha bint Luas's arms. Her black eyes were opaque as coal, and the collar at her neck was so bright it was nearly blinding. Mazen squinted, blinked. There were tears in his eyes. My father dead, but you are still alive, unless you plan on succumbing to Ifrit magic. Mazen could feel that magic pressing on his mind, digging into his senses. Every time he blinked, the memories threatened to pull him under. Perhaps a nightmare was better than this. In a nightmare, he could lose himself in self-loathing. He could run. The word sharpened his mind. We all start as cowards, Aisha had once told him. The only difference between a hero and a coward is that one forgets their fear and fights, while the other succumbs to it and flees. He slapped himself. The world came into horrifying clarity. He saw fire and smoke, swords and blood. The mysterious reinforcements were here in full force. The most powerful illusions are crafted from memories. Aisha stood. Mazen saw that she had two swords now. No doubt she had pilfered the second from a corpse. There looked to be many now. While Mazen had been trapped in the past, the world had gone to hell. Is this whole place a mirage, then? His throat was dry. We were in a souk before, and then a palace, and now... Aliyah can paint the world in shades of memory, including her own. I assume she threaded these illusions together to confuse you. Mazen thought of Kadir's forlorn smile in the souk, his sudden anger at the golden bridge. Perhaps Aliyah meant to ensnare as much as confuse them. And the lamp? Why was it in the room that looked like a treasury? Aisha sighed. Perhaps it was a coincidence it ended up in that particular illusion. Perhaps Aliyah's magic reacted to Rija's. How would I know? Our magics are similar, but not the same. She shook her head. Aliyah is strong. Some of her illusions are so real, one can touch and taste them. But they are just that, elaborate, mind-altering illusions. She began to walk away, back to the fighting, when Mazen called after her. You betrayed my brother. Why? Because I am not a tool, Aisha snapped. She rushed off without another word. Mazen eyed the battle from a distance. He saw a creature of fire darting in and out of the battle. Rija, and what might have been the merchant weaving through smoke. It was pure chaos. Mazen knew he would be easily defeated the moment they saw him. He eyed his shadow on the ground, forgotten in all this chaos. Then I just won't let them see me. He stuffed the lamp into his satchel, threw his shadow over his head, and went searching for his brother.